Hey, welcome back. Taking a look at Nach Paris. It's a VUCA Sims game. They have recently sent this to me, and it's a pre-release version. I think the game is still under pre-order. It's approximately 100 euros, 108 euros thereabouts. And I wanted to spend some time having a look at the game components first. I have had an opportunity to read the majority of the rulebook, not all of the rulebook. So hopefully I can offer a couple of comments on some of the systems inside the game as well as we go. But I wanted to spend some time on the components here because it's not very often that I get super geeked out or excited about the the box and the counters and the maps and stuff like that. But this guy has really sort of raised the bar for what you receive in the box. It's one of the 3-inch ones, right? It's big, heavy, and lots in it. And it's got this lovely linen, maybe satin. It's probably linen finish is what it feels like. So it's got a texture to it that's very nice. Obviously the box art is evocative, very interesting. And on the back, we've got some information about what the game is about, and set in August 1914, earliest part of the war. Lots of maneuver and activity there, hopefully. And it deals with the German advance on Paris and the French and British counterattacks and repulsing of that and all that sort of good stuff. And I think it runs through to the end of September thereabouts. We'll look at it inside if we get a chance. It gives it a high solitaire suitability rating. Now, I know some folks get sort of bent out of shape about solitaire and not having solo AI systems. It doesn't have a solo AI system. It's a large hex and counter game with 1,300 pieces. There is no solo AI. So if that's what you're looking for, stop the video, move on. This ain't your game. However, if you are able to sit down and be, reasonable, you can play both sides very effectively, like any hex and counter game with 4 maps and 1,300 counters. I know 1,377 counters actually. I know by the time I get from one end of the map to the other, I forget what the opponent was going to do anyway, and I am, I guess, able to bifurcate my brain and do the best for both sides. But there is no AI, all right? So let's just get that off the table. Rule book, 4 maps, 12 scenarios, a big campaign scenario that I'm gonna be very excited about playing, but it's not gonna happen in the short term. We will be looking at some of the smaller scenarios that I can fit on my table, just because we are constrained on space for the next 12 months or so. Okay, so complexity 6 out of ish, what is that, 9? Maybe it's 10, I don't know. It's relatively complex, and it's, I think, more involved than anything else, rather than complex per se. You can see the counter art here that they're fairly busy counters. There's a lot going on, and we're going to talk about those when we open the box up. All right, Bertrand Mounier, my apologies for butchering your name. French designer, I think first-time designer, perhaps. Who knows? We'll find out more about him at some point. Okay, so like I said, big sexy box. I've already pulled some of the stuff out. First thing I want to do is really just show you these maps, because there's 2 things about them that I like. That got me excited about wanting to put the game out and play it. The first is this parchment / linen texture and feel of the map. The weight of the paper is reasonably substantial. It feels like it's got a water resistant coating on it. So it's a matte finish, so we're not going to get a lot of glare. The artwork is extraordinary. I like that each city, I'm going to see if I can zoom in on some stuff here. Here we go. We'll look at Strasbourg. My camera's been playing up the stand. I'm having no luck with stands these days. I'm going to need to go pro one of these days. See how the city has the larger name and then also this smaller name in reverse, so that if you're playing opposed, both opponents can see the names of the cities. I like that. That's a nice little touch. And in fact, it's done all over here, generally speaking. Now, some of these are hard to read, right? I'm looking at them at sort of gameplay distance, and they're not legible. These little bridges and trails, and probably maybe they're villages or points of interest or whatever. But it's a detailed map. It brings a lot of context and a lot of information out onto the situation and makes it interesting. We'll have a look at the terrain effects chart in a sec so we can explain some of these things. But I want to just show you, this is just one of the maps. There are two larger maps. I'll open one up so we can see it. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get it all in frame. I'll zoom out. So there's Paris here, right? This is the most southernmost map. And you can see there's lots of open terrain there for us to play with, assuming the Germans get that far. And of course, can I actually fold the map back up and get it folded correctly? And then you'll be able to see the coastline of Calais here and the channel. See if I can hold this guy open for you like this, and I'm going to pick up my stand, and so there you can see that. Really very attractive maps. So this got me very excited about getting the game to the table, which is one of the things that with the box art and the counters and the rules and the maps in particular gets you excited. It makes it pretty easy to want to then dig into the rule and do the work, right? So I'm going to pop this stuff over to one side. There's another map here with no need for us to pull it out. I mentioned that the counters were fairly busy, and I'm going to pull the rule book here, two D20. I'm going to pull the counter description details out, and we'll have a look so I can explain some things to you. There's a lot of information counters in the game, and I've forgotten them. If I got these all upside down, I have. Great. All right. There are some optional hidden movement rules so that you can cover your counters with a blank. So that aids the... Now, obviously, with hidden, if you do that, that's going to negatively impact your solo play. So I won't be using those rules, and they are optional. So there's that. Rivers and rail lines are very important in this game, and there are lots of markers to help you keep track of what's going on where for that. And then there are field works that can be placed as well in the game, and fortifications and armed camps and things like that. We'll just have a look at the different factions here. Sides, there's more info counters. These are some breakdowns and replacements, hidden movement counters. And then we're getting into the meat of it, the French formations. Let's see if we can zoom in there. All right. So here's what's interesting about these guys, and we'll see if we can find a couple of different units to talk about. So starting with an infantry formation, I'm going to try and zoom in for us. Well, maybe it's best to just, well, let's just talk it through and do it this way, and I'll read it off here because I think this is interesting. So there are, or can be, multiple counters for a particular formation. The formations range in size from division down to battalion, and there's a lot of information on these counters, right? So the bottom left-hand side is the combat factor, which is fairly straightforward, right? The next one would be, the 7 would be the artillery factor, and if it was red, it would give us a bonus for being a heavy howitzer, right? Then there's a second artillery factor that is, and now I forget, doggone it, versus forts, that's right. And then you'll see these movement rates look very high, but you're going to see that the cost to move around is very high. So there are these large numbers for movement rates. And I haven't moved anything on the map yet, so I don't understand necessarily why they chose this particular means of having these fairly significant combat movement rates. We'll see. Obviously, the historical designation, the combat ability rating. Now, this 9 here is going to be a number you're going to need to reference a lot, because when you receive a combat result, you're going to be rolling against a D20 against that number, and you need to roll that number or less to be successful in that sort of morale check. And if you fail that morale check, you're going to lose a step. And these circles here, the red ones, denote that you have lost 2 steps of the 4, right? So this is division, so it's probably a 5-step unit. I think that might be how it works, but let's just carry on and keep talking. So I have 2 steps left here, right? Here I have 4 steps. Now, some units just don't have multiple counters, but there are some that do. So we've just happened to pick a division here that has 2 counters. Had a little interruption there, so we're going to try and pick up from where we were. And I was discussing the red and black circles that show us the number of steps that are left in a particular counter. Okay, so it's actually they call it the attrition level. Yeah, and then further on, we obviously have the unit size, core designation, and color. That's these markings here. So it's going to be visually easy to know who belongs to what. One of my pet peeves with some games that make it a lot of hard work. You've got to look at the specific numbers or unit designations to work things out, but having some color coding really allows us to be more efficient with our setup time and gameplay time and stuff like that. All right, now artillery units are different, and HQ units are different again, and there are cavalry units in the game as well. There are siege artillery units in the game. There are pioneer units in the game. So there's a whole set of engineering units as well, and there are some specific rules around how the German leadership and command ranges work in the game for the HQ units. So fairly detailed from that perspective. There appears to have been a lot of research gone into deriving accurate numbers and values for the combat units within the game, both for the French and the Germans. Often with some French designers, I see sort of a heavy lean in and bias towards the capabilities of the French being perhaps a little more boosted than one would think when we look at it from an outsider's perspective. You know, maybe if a British person is doing the assessment, they're making the Brits look more capable, and the French make the French look more capable, and maybe the Germans make the Germans look more capable. I don't know. Anyway, I've noticed that with some games. One, for example, would be the Lock and Load tactical game, the Honor and Patrie. There were all sorts of unique capabilities and sort of up-gunning and up-armoring of various French units. And I know that also Thin Red Line Games has been going at it with a number of French folks talking about the capabilities of units in 1985 that were mostly mythical or paper-based. So who knows what this is like? I've seen lots of good research documentation in the designer notes, the referencing and things like that, so that's always nice to see. So look, lots of counters, as I said, 1,377 counters. So we don't need to go and look at every single one of them, but they're all here. Now, here's the other thing that I thought was pretty spectacular. We'll come to that in a minute. But there are scenario cards that we can just take this and play the game. And this is a learning scenario. It'll take us an hour to play it. And there's another scenario on the back here as well. So running from, this is 26th of August through 31st. Right, and 2 through 17. And there's a whole bunch of them. 2, 4, 6, 8 right here, right? And the Battle for the Muse. So this is fantastic for small format gameplay. So although if you're a purchaser of war games and you shy away from multi-map games, and this is a 4-map system, you would still be able to play 8 different scenarios here that look very, interesting based on the scenario booklet that I've been reading. So they look pretty fascinating, and you've got your game turn track here, running from 1st of August. Here we go. We'll deal with that to the September 16th. So 23 turns, right? So 2nd of August through the 16th of September. So you'll need these 2 things and then the player aid card, and you're done. Tiny format, very nice and very clever idea. So a fortifications chart, not 100% certain what we need that for, but we'll dig into that when we get into the rules in detail. As I said, I've read the movement, combat, and command rules, and there's a little bit of supply stuff in there I've had a squiz at, but that's about it. And I've read the artillery stuff. So now each scenario has a setup chart, and it's very detailed here, so it's going to let you pick your scenario, lay your counters out. You'll have all the different markers and how many munitions you have, the ammo supply that you have for your artillery and all that sort of good stuff. So you can see all those here. I think that's pretty nice. I like all that. And there's a bunch of those in here as well. Now, player aid, 2 of these, nice thick stock. First up, we'll get to the sequence of play off the bat, right? And the sequence of play is quite different than anything I've seen before in terms of the specific details that what goes on in each of these phases. And I'm not going to go into detail on that right now because I don't want to butcher my impressions. I want to wait, or how I think it works. I want to actually play the game with the sequence of play here and then talk about it. And we'll talk about some of the unique aspects that I found once I've actually experienced them, so we don't misrepresent what's going on here. All right, so field works and all that sort of good stuff. Now, combat results table, it's an eye chart, right? It's well color-coded, but there's some stuff going on here. We've got odds from 1 to 5 to 7 to 1 across the top. Die roll on a D20 with the maximum of +4, +5, -4 on the columns. And then as we come across here on the rows, we can see the attacker defender result. Let me just bring this a little closer for you. And then there's a reading here that we'll be taking that morale check I told you about, that number. So that if it was a 9 previously, we'll have to add 5 to that number, and -6 to that number if we're the defender. So this is a 2.5 to 1 attack. So -6, if I had a 9, I would now have to roll 3 or less, I believe is how that works. And then here, if I'm the attacker, and I've obviously done well with this attack, so I would add 5 to the number, so 9 be 14. Now I've got a much better chance of being successful, and I won't, if I fail, I won't take a step loss. Here, I am going to take a step loss if I fail, and I think the red full circle means that I will also take as a mandatory step loss. And you can see as we get higher into the 7 to 1 odds that things go pear-shaped for the defender, and things go pear-shaped at 1 to 5 for the attacker. So that's makes a lot of sense. There we go there. All right, so that's interesting. Artillery bombardment and results table, same concept. Applying the results on a different table. There's also, as we mentioned earlier on, fortification bombardment tables as well. And then nice explanation of the combat results table here. You can work through that. Now, that said, I read this. It didn't tell me really what I wanted to know, and I had to go to the rule book and read. how it all actually worked and actually look at this example of play to see how things work. So I think they missed an opportunity here to be more precise. Combat modifiers, out of command effects, etc., etc. And there's all this sort of good stuff here for how to do extended movement, and in training and detraining, rail movement is going to be important in this game. Let me zoom out a little bit if I can. I don't think I can. All right, and then I think I showed you that, and there's that. And there's a terrain effects chart somewhere. Or maybe that's on the map. I don't know where that is. Oh, here's one thing that we do need to touch on, and I'm curious about this, and I haven't found an explanation for it other than it's an enriching aspect for historicity. But units have facing regardless of size. And now the facing will obviously change based on the size. So if you have a very small unit, it'll have a smaller front. But if you have a larger unit, it will have a larger, see, here's a full, what is that, a division? Yeah, so a division, and that's cavalry, will have a 360 front, but infantry as a division will have a facing, and you have to maintain that facing and monitor that facing because it will have an effect upon the combat results and the DRMs that are applied, etc., etc. So all sorts of interesting stuff going on there. All right, so odd and unusual, and I guess that has something to do with the somewhat linear nature of World War I combat, but we'll learn more about that as we play. So I'm not going to pass any judgment on it. Full color, excellently organized and laid out rule book with significant charts, tables, and examples of play, which are very, very helpful. Couple of little translation issues here and there, nothing significant that will take things away from you. There were a couple of things here that I read, I think particularly with artillery, where I was reading the artillery rules, and it did say it implied one thing, and as the English words were stated, it meant something different. So there'll probably be some clarification questions that I'll be posting to look to get some confirmation on, to make sure that I am indeed reading the rules correctly. I'm not going to get into too much detail on the rule book. We'll just note that it is extremely well laid out and well structured. Here's a very extensive example of combat, for instance. And there's actually, in the back of the scenario book, there's a multi-turn example of gameplay as well. So look, lots of charts, lots of images, lots of graphics here. We're dealing with a 38, 39 page rule book thereabouts with an index in the back. And I think by the time you take out all the artwork and all the rest of it, it's probably 20 pages or 22 pages of rules. But look, there's detail here. There's specifics and case-based steps that you're going to have to pay attention to. There's a significant amount of detail. So this is probably why it gets the rating of 6 out of 9 or 10 or whatever that rating scale is on the back of the box, because there's some work to do, right? Scenario booklet, extremely well laid out as well. This will be the campaign gameplay area that you'll be working with. And this is 27 hours to probably play that from game turn 1 through game turn 22 with 1,000+ counters on the full map. And then it's got these little summaries here, right, of how many game turns, number of counters, number of hours to play, what maps are used, just all laid out very nicely. Look, this really lifts the bar for everybody who are publishing, designing, and making games. There's no reason why we all, others cannot do similar things in terms of the quality of layout and the structure and the quality of the components is fantastic. I'm blown away by it. Haven't played it yet, so we'll see. Remains to be seen if it's actually a good game or not, but we're going to get there with that. Still got to finish up some other bits and pieces that I'm in the middle of, but this will be one of the next games that I get to. I do have to finish the rules, obviously, but I hope you enjoyed a rather long video. My apologies for that going on. I know a lot of people don't like unboxings, but I wanted to give you a good in-depth look at this just because it really is a beautifully presented, wonderfully structured, and well thought out game and game box and all that sort of good stuff. So I appreciate VUCA sending me the complimentary copy. We'll get into the game. We'll play the game. I'll give it my usual straightforward, honest assessment once we're done, and we'll take it from there. All the best. Ciao.